Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, apologies that you didn't get a video yesterday. I didn't end up having time to record before my LASIK surgery, which I've now had. So if I look a little tired in the eyes, that's because this time yesterday I was having my corneas sliced open and lasered and then put back together. So it's been a long 24 hours, but I can already see great. I went to my son's cross-country meet this morning without glasses, without contacts, and it's just like a whole new world to me. So we are back with part 3 of the 30 Years' War from Extra History. If you didn't see my first 2 parts of the reaction, the link is in the description. That'll take you back to part 1, as well as a link to the original video for part 3. But let's go ahead and dive right into this.
Opened the third seal. I heard the third beast say, "Come and see." And I beheld, and lo, a black horse. And he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the 4 beasts say, "A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny. And see thou hurt not the oil and the wine." Southern Germany, 1624. Hunger. It greeted the man at dawn, and lay down with him at dusk. Sometimes its gnawing woke him up at night. Even before the war, cold weather had made bad harvests. Then the emperor came, took land, and debased the coin to pay his mercenaries. The bread price quadrupled. And that was all before soldiers sacked his house and carried off the family cow. Now there was only hunger. Hunger and the dead, and a terrible solution.
So all throughout history, wars have had as a determining factor the ability to feed your people. One of the main reasons why Germany eventually collapses during World War I is because of the blockade that started to cause significant suffering among the civilian population with food and resources during World War I. That was true. I just came back from Vicksburg, and the reason Vicksburg surrendered was not because they didn't have an army that could defend the city. Their 30,000 men, had they been well fed, could have held out against 4 or 5 times that number easily with the strength of those defenses, but they couldn't hold out without food. Food determines the course of history so often.
Thanks so much to Ting Mobile for helping this historic tale come through loud and clear. Periodic famine was a regular occurrence in 17th century Europe. Natural events like extreme weather, insect infestation, or botanical disease could cost a harvest. But while going hungry wasn't unheard of, like many things about the 30 Years' War, it was the scale of the famine that ensures it's still remembered to this day. And as we continue our investigation of the 30 Years' War as a humanitarian disaster, we have to examine the role hunger played. Even without the war, the 17th century was a lean one for Central Europe, sitting at the center of the Little Ice Age, a time where, for uncertain reasons, temperatures dropped several degrees in the northern hemisphere. Now, theories about why include the Earth's orbit and tilt, increased volcanic eruptions, or changes in oceanic circulation. But no matter what the cause, the end result was that European farms likely saw decreased crop productivity and shortened growing seasons, so there was just less food to go around, period.
So let's talk about the Little Ice Age for just a second. So for the most part, they actually say that the Little Ice Age refers to a broader period of about 1300 to 1850. You can see here, starting around 1300, that at least as measured in central England, there was a steady decline in the average temperature, kind of bottoming out just before 1700, where there's a rapid increase. And there's a lot of factors for this, and some of it even might come down to the accuracy of the measurements being used. You know, so there's only so much you can really attribute to this, but there seems to have been a pretty steady decline during that time, and then it's only been since then that we've kind of started to see an increase again.
And then came the Kipper and Vipper years, one of the most unbelievable economic crises in the history of Europe. Now, I know that's an odd term, but there's really no current-day English equivalent. What exactly Kipper and Vipper stands for varies on the telling, but one leading theory states that Kipper refers to clipping coins, more on that in a minute, and Vipper means a sort of seesaw, a reference to the scales of the money changers. The Holy Roman Empire, you see, didn't have a single currency. Southern Germany had silver and gold coins they favored, and Northern Germany used 2 different coins, which we're not going to differentiate here to make things simpler. Both, however, theoretically, did have pennies. But in reality, they cost so much to produce that the state gave up, and people mostly imported foreign coins instead, which was normal since Germany was a trade crossroads. And this was a period where certain trading towns might have dozens of foreign currencies in circulation due to traders passing through.
So you can imagine what this does, and I don't know if he'll talk about this or not, but because you've got multiple currencies, and there's no set, standard out there for how these currencies could be exchanged, so it's going to be controlled by whoever's doing the exchanging, and they're probably going to make a little bit in the process, and so this really opens the door for a lot of manipulation, a lot of kind of just underhanded stuff where people can kind of take advantage of people who maybe don't know better.
Now, no one knows where they came from. Suspects include Switzerland and Italy. But in the late 1500s, some debased foreign coins had made their way into the Holy Roman Empire. Now, taking a step back for a moment, what does it mean for a coin to be debased, you might ask? Well, simply put, it means that the gold and silver coin contained less of the precious metal than they were supposed to. And because people in the empire kept trading their non-debased gold and silver coins for debased ones, the states as a whole were losing money.
So you ever seen people bite, like in the Olympics, they do this, they bite the metals. That goes back to something where people would bite into something that was supposed to be gold, and if it was soft, because gold's a very soft metal, if you could bite into it and leave a mark, then it was understood to be made up of more gold than it otherwise would have. It was just one little way of checking to see if something was debased. It also could weigh it. A lot of ways to check that.
So then rulers began debasing their own coins to try to even everything out, but the end result being that by 1609, the value of the empire's silver coins fell by 20%. Of course, there are a few different ways to debase coinage. One involves mixing other metals into them, bringing down the silver and gold content of each coin so you can make more coins with less precious metal. But another one is clipping coins, shaving or cutting edges off of them, and then melting down those scraps to make brand new coins. And in an economic system that relies on a coin literally being worth its weight in silver and gold, both those tactics are dangerous. They literally make money worth less than advertised. Now, even back then, it was known that bad currency drives out good, making people hoard non-debased coinage, or for governments to debase their own coin in competition. But in the short term, debasing could have its benefits. You have 8,000 coins, then you debase them, and now you have 10,000 coins. You just upped your assets 20%, which is useful if you need to hire or pay, let's take a shot in the dark here, a bunch of soldiers. You see where this is going. Even before the war began, a lot of city mints, with minimal imperial oversight, were already debasing their coin.
It's no different than today. We make jokes about governments printing money so that there's more of it. Same kind of thing here. It's basically the medieval form of printing money, is to debase the money to make it stretch farther so that you can do more with it, but eventually that's going to hurt your economy long term.
Ferdinand pursued that policy for Bohemia even before the revolt, and afterward, the Catholic nobles he brought in to replace the exiled Protestant ones kicked it into high gear. But debasing became especially attractive once the war began, and states came under strain funding their defense. But it was also both a way to enrich those doing it and practice economic sabotage. Nobles, town leaders, and even priests would start their own unofficial mints, clipping good coins or producing bad ones. Then those with the highest gold and silver content they would keep. And the rest? Well, they'd get a traveling con man to bring them to the next state over.
So this is also something that happened a lot. There was a lot of this going on during the American Revolutionary War, where there were actually attempts by the British to destroy the American economy by flooding the American market with counterfeit notes, like written notes. And my ninth great grandfather on my direct mail line was one of the people who signed continental currency back then. There's actually notes out there from like the 1770s from Philadelphia with his signature on it. So they would try to flood the market with all this stuff, and by doing so, they're debasing the currency. And I actually have read stories of men who were executed for doing this on behalf of the British, for flooding the economy with bad currency. So this has been going on for a long, long time.
preferably one that supported the opposite cause, and convinced common people to exchange their good coins for the debased ones. It essentially became a race to the bottom, with each state trying to dump bad coin on their neighbors, take the neighbors' non-debased coins back, and debase them to make more money. And the result was a total collapse of the currency. Some coins fell to an eighth of their value, and hyperinflation went out of control. Bread prices were particularly dire. In one diary from the period, a soldier claims that 45 silver pieces could only buy 2 pounds of bread. And a seminary student in a university town remembered a loaf costing a full gold piece. And some of the biggest perpetrators of this were major figures in the war. Ferdinand, as we mentioned, championed debasing Bohemian coin to pay his soldiers, but when he moved his Catholic lords into Bohemia, nearly all of them set up mints to make a quick buck. The most successful of which was Albrecht von Wallenstein, who invested money he'd inherited from his wife into mints in Bohemia, using the profits to set up a mini fiefdom in the country and raise a private army. Then using this very literal war chest, he became one of the most influential imperial generals of the conflict. Though imperial edict finally fixed the exchange rate in 1623.
So this is what I was talking about earlier. You've got everybody making their own exchange rates, and so you've got to have some kind of regulation. You know, we have this debate going on to this day about how much does the government get involved in the market, in private business. And if you don't have some kind of oversight, some kind of regulation, these are the kinds of things that can happen. So you want to have some involvement, but the debate is always going to be how much is too much.
There was no undoing the damage. Urbanized classes like merchants and tradesmen were ruined, with food prices rising eightfold. And because they lived in cities, they had no farms to grow their own food. Areas like Bohemia were hit even worse, since Ferdinand's religious policies were driving out the moneyed classes of Protestant artisans and skilled workers. It left the country short of doctors, lawyers, merchants, and builders. They in turn fled to Protestant cities, driving prices even higher there, since more population means more demand for food. And then came the soldiers. Soldiers that had to be paid, often by rulers ordering tax hikes on their already destitute subjects. Generals routinely took on more soldiers than they could pay, making up for the shortfall with contributions from the cities they marched into, essentially demanding money in exchange for not sacking the town.
So it's just a spiraling out of control here. You've already got issues of people not having work, people not having enough food because there aren't enough people farming the food to send it to the cities where there's a bunch of people living in cities that don't have enough food. And now you've got armies that need to be fed and need to be paid, and you've got invasions happening, and it's just a downward spiral, and everybody's going to be affected. And this is why, as we've mentioned, more than most wars in history, the 30 Years' War is primarily a war about what it does to the civilian population and the millions who died as a result of these wars.
Armies also quartered soldiers in civilian homes, at times for months, with families made to provide for the unwelcomed house guests. And of course, there was also the looting, pillaging, and confiscation of crops and livestock, which was pretty rampant. But that was micro scale. On a macro level, once the monarchs began running out of money, they started paying troops in land. Ferdinand was the first to do this, granting Maximilian lands in the Palatinate for the use of his army. But there were others. And new rulers, unfamiliar with the territory, did little to even out the situation.
Again, making a parallel here, when you don't have the money to pay and you don't have other ways to do that, land is a common way to do that. But it hasn't happened a lot in Europe because there's not a lot of new land that's going to be available in Europe. But this is something you saw a ton in North America. The American Revolutionary War, one of the primary ways that men who fought for the United States in the Revolution, one of the primary ways they were paid was in land. And that's why you see, everything west of the Appalachian Mountains was off limits before the Revolution. After the Revolution, the United States claims all this land all the way to the Mississippi River. This is all a bunch of brand new land that can be given to soldiers. And so, for example, you see Kentucky, Ohio, other places like that, even into Indiana, just gobbled up quick by all of these people who settled in these areas, given reward for their service.
Accounts of the time discuss nuns corralling orphans into convent grounds, begging passing troops for food, families trying to eat grass, and cats and dogs disappearing from cities. Soldiers, often just as hungry, lamed or poisoned their horses so they could be butchered for food. And because sieges were such a feature of the conflict, garrisons found themselves running low on supplies much earlier than normal. It was mostly from here that the stories of cannibalism came. And while we shouldn't believe every one of them, it's generally accepted that it happened on occasion.
And again, this happens throughout history. In the United States, we're most familiar with things like the Donner Party, but cannibalism definitely happened at Jamestown in those first couple of years of the settlement of Jamestown, and starting in 1607. In fact, if you go there today, they've actually got a body on display that they found in the last few years, and you can see the cut marks on the cheeks from where they cut away the flesh to eat it. And a lot of people think, well, I would never do that. I would die first. But, until you're in that situation, until you're actually starving, you don't know what you're capable of. People who are that desperate have an instinct to want to stay alive. And in that desire to stay alive, you'll do just about anything to stay alive.
The poor eating each other, and the rich making more money. But that was not the end. There was still one final horseman left. Because while armies marched from town to town, taking whatever they wished, they often left something in their wake. Plague, pestilence, and death.
Yep.
The rider on the pale horse is coming, and his scythe will kill more than the other horsemen combined.
All right, so, once again, very interesting stuff, and it's so important for us when we are studying the history of times of war to understand that there's so much more involved than just armies moving on a battlefield, and who attacked who and how they outflanked each other and how they maneuvered strategically. There's the home front. There's the food, the logistics, the disease that happens. All of these things, like we've said before, up until World War II, the primary cause of death in pretty much every war in history to that point was disease. And not just among the armies, but among the civilian population too. And the 30 Years' War is a great example of that. So let me know your thoughts. Use the comment section below. We will be back tomorrow with the final episode. Actually, I think there might be 2 more episodes to this series. But we'll be back with those very soon. Thanks for watching.